show. Today I'm going to talk about the Tom Clancy adaptations that the Paramount made from the early 90s pretty much to the 2010s. A series that had so many different actors that actually made Batman look consistent in comparison. You know, they just changed their actor every film after a while, and it get rebooted so many times, and they did so much wrong with it, and it's an odd series. It's a really odd series, but of course, you know, I watched them for a video because why not? Well, it started out with Hunt for October, which is the best of the series by a mile. Everyone knows that's the best one. It's a John McTiernan film, and it's funny how I've talked about Rollerball in another video recently, and now I'm talking about this one, which is one of his best films. You know, after I talked about one of his worst films. Hunt for October, I saw in the cinema, and it just holds up beautifully. I mean, it's a Cold War film. The problem with this film is they made it, and then Glasnost happened like halfway through the filming of it, and it was like, okay, what do we do now? Oh no. Well, how was the development before Glasnost? Then Glasnost happened, they were just about to start shooting and start casting. And there's a story Sean Connery was sent the script, he was like, well, this doesn't make any sense. And the first page of the script wasn't there, which said this happened in 1984. And to do this whole thing is, what you're about to see has been denied, you know, type of thing. Is like, it's a true story, but it's not a true story, type of thing. But it sets the context up perfectly. The whole idea is Sean Connery plays a Russian submarine captain on this new Russian submarine that's way more advanced than anything the Americans have. It can't be spotted. It's a new drive that's top secret. So he knows that this is actually going to cause the balance of power to switch in a very disastrous way for both countries. It's like, because the Cold War was like a thing where no one could either say could do much because it was very evenly worked out. So, because both sides had nukes, both sides had similar technology, so no one could really do much. They just had to try and do proxy wars in different countries and destroy all of them. You know, if you're in any country in the Americas that was in any way socialist, you were going to get crushed in the 80s. You were going to be treated so badly. But during this is the idea is that Connery's character knows that this deterrent won't hold if this submarine is successful. So both sides need to have it, otherwise it's a problem. He also wants to defect. He's sick of communism. He wants to defect. So he creates a situation where he puts all his best people on board under his command by saying, we need these people to test the ship out, test the submarine out, so I need these best people. It turns out these are all people he knows. He knows that they also want to defect. So he's going to defect with a submarine. And the only way to do it is to basically do a psychological warfare. So the film's about, has he cracked or is he going to defect? The Russians are trying to tell everyone he's cracked. First they're going to don't admit he exists. Then when people find out he exists, they say he's cracked. They do not want the Americans to have the ship, because obviously that's their advantage. On the American side, you have the Jack Ryan character who goes through all these stories. Early on, he's just an analyst who gets wind of this thing from spies because he's an analyst for CIA. And he's the one who's to investigate the ship, not anything else, just the ship. And he's also worked on stuff about Ramius before, so he knows who Ramius is. And basically, it's a war game between these two, because Ryan thinks he's going to defect, but he has to prove it to the American Navy, the American CIA, it's a defection, not a man gone mad attacking. So there's a psychological thing going on, as well as all these wonderful submarine sequences throughout the film. It just works. The idea is solid, the setup's solid. It's a bit outlandish, but it's solid for a thriller. It really works the thriller. The cast is terrific. Everyone's cast well. You have Scott Glenn as the American captain of the submarine tracking the Red October. Connery's at his best. Sam Neill's his sidekick, who's very good as well. You've got a bunch of American actors and British actors playing these Russians with cod accents, but it all works really well. You've got a cook who's a Russian secret agent who causes all these problems and shit. Alec Baldwin plays Ryan, and there's only time in this series, and he's terrific because he's a young guy who's very inexperienced, which is how the character works best. Because the problem with the character is, I mean, he's up in the CIA. CIA is a very corrupt place. If you're still if you're a character who's too high up, how are you not corrupt in some way is the basic problem. This series was running too pretty quick. The film really works. It's hard to talk about in a weird way because it works so well. Just the craftsmanship of the submarine sequences, the way it kind of moves the camera through the subs and works everything. It tells you everything in advance of what you need to know. It jumps around from different places while still keeping you on the main plot, and you always know where you are. And it builds and builds as the story goes on to become more and more tense and insane. So the whole thing works. It's just a great example of how you do a good submarine movie, how you do a good spy movie within a submarine. It really works. They took a book, they adapted it properly, the film worked. There's some, John Millie's come in and did some rewrites for it to spruce up the Connery character, and they really work. Because there's some nice little moments between Connery and Sam Neill that work really well. So it's just a really well made film. It would never get as good as that. They fluked the first time. You know, the series would never be anywhere near as good as this again. Like any type of way. Right, so then they went into Patriot Games, which is the worst film in the series. Now, at this point, Alec Baldwin was having negotiation problems with Paramount. Partially, from what I've read, is because they did not want to do Patriot Games. There's a second film because they thought it was a bad book. And it is. It's a bad book. It's a terrible story. It's awful. I've covered it already in the world of the dumbest films I've ever seen. The view of Ireland in this film is terrible. It is not realistic at all. It has no clue about the nuances of the problems between Ireland and Britain. It portrays, I mean, it's easy to portray the IRA as monsters because so many of them were monsters. But it's a nuanced situation with lots of difficulties. And just treat them like cartoon characters doesn't work. And you've got basically the CIA working in Ireland to take out these IRA people for the one person, as if that's a heroic thing rather than an actual act of war and a massive problem. So this is the problem the film had straight away. Alec Baldwin wasn't in it, so he was played by Harrison Ford. No one knew exactly what happened. Baldwin and John McTiernan, who directed the first one, both wanted to do Clear and Present Danger, which became the third film. So he said, that's a much better story, let's do that. And let's ignore this one because it's not a good story. They did not want to do that. They wanted to go into Patriot Games. It's a simpler story for them. Patriot Games is bloody awful. Philip Noyce directed it after Dead Cam, and he seemed to have lost all his talent in this film because it's every shot in Britain's a cliche. No British character's motivation works. They're all cliches. They're all terrible. And it's like, is this a view of Britain from Fantasyland? Worse still is what I've said before. It's the CIA going to war against the IRA. And it's like, whoa, this is really stupid. And you have Harrison Ford in this one, and he never works as this character very well. Because he was in his 40s, and this character is meant to be younger. Though the character only works when he's younger, because he's a character who's learned the ropes. As soon as he becomes a CIA guy, it's like, okay, there's corruption involved. And this whole film bends over backwards to suggest this is a loving parent who's doing his best to be sophisticated and work his way through a problem. But for all the world, outside American sees this as a fascist guy who wants to make all these excuses to do what he wants to do, It's like, it doesn't work. It's like, you went into a problem which wasn't your problem, and it suddenly becomes this war situation, really, but they don't ever admit it. And it's like, you have the whole CIA working for you to deal with this guy. We're meant to be sympathetic towards you in some way. Instead of actually saying, okay, these are the shades of grey in this situation. That's a very difficult situation. You're going to have to be compromised to get ahead. They're not going to do that. They're not going to compromise Harrison Ford as a character. So it becomes this bland character. And Harrison Ford does not do sincerity well. He does sarcasm well. Sincerity is boring in him. And has taken his character to sincerity. Always. Which makes the character much less interesting. So it's a really stupid film. Anyone who knows anything about Ireland is going to be appalled by how dumb it is. It's just stupid and always. And it just tries to justify American involvement in other countries as if it's a self-defense thing. And it's like, no, you went in there, you are doing terrible things. And you try to protect your character, your lead character, from saying, oh, he's a good guy. And it's like, a proper drama would have taken this and more complexity. So it's a terrible film. It's just so bloody awful. It's one of the dumbest films you'll ever see. The third one, Clear and Present Danger, was for the same team from the second one. They were trying to make amends because everyone hated Patriot Games, including the author of the book. Tom Clancy hated it too. I mean, it's like, just everyone thought it was terrible. And Harrison Ford did not look good because he came off, he replaced another actor, and it was a terrible film. And and compared to Hunt for Red October, this was a massive letdown. So it was a disaster on all fronts. In between Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, Harrison Ford made The Fugitive was a massive hit. So it added some luster to him again. So they made Clear and Present Danger this time, the film that McTiernan and Baldwin wanted to make in the first place, and made a film that for 2/3 was actually pretty decent. But the problem's Harrison Ford. He's now been promoted to the head of the CIA intelligence division because James Earl Jones' character from the first two, who's his mentor, is ill. Now, again, I'm a great actor, James Earl Jones, but they don't give him much to do. They don't ever give him much nuance as someone who might be pretty dodgy. They always try and make him a teddy bear character. It's like, well, that's a weird... I mean, Hunt for October, he was a serious character, but as soon as Harrison Ford came in, he became much more of a comic relief character, which is a bit of a waste. So now Harrison Ford learned how to deal with Washington and dealing with the drug wars in America, and a president who's making emotional decisions, and dealing with the kind of operation side of things where they're doing things that are really dodgy and are trying to keep it away from Congress. So there's a lot of dodgy dealing behind the scenes to do this, attacking the drug cartels that's illegal, and try to do it out of sight so no one knows it's them. All of which could be really interesting. You know, it's outlandish, but it's outlandish the same way Hunt for October was outlandish. The idea of, what if the president did something really stupid, which is basically send troops into basically seven American countries. You know, it's not a good idea because it's basically a declaration of war. But it's still a solid situation to actually use as for a thriller. But again, the problem is, you need to have, if you're going to do that, you need to have a character who is compromised, who has to deal with failure and difficulties of this complex situation. Because these cartels are putting drugs into America, but also their country messed up by America, and Americans are buying these drugs because of various social issues that America won't deal with. So it's a complicated issue, and this is a simplistic solution to it. But you could do something and say, look, this is a simplistic solution to a very complex issue. This film wouldn't do that. Nor, again, will it deal with your lead character as a complex character. No, he has to be the beacon of hope, a sincere character as the head of CIA intelligence. Yes, that's stupid. And nobody gets that job if they're naive. No one, they would not allow it. In any possible way would that be allowed. Someone that naive being in that position. Because you actually need someone who knows where to bury the bodies. And it just becomes this thing of, okay, they've done this to have an ending so that you get some hope, but it's not realistic at all. You've made the film complete. You've taken an idea that's a fun exercise in what Americans behave stupid in this situation and made it unrealistic by having this character in it. And the film goes downhill slowly, surely from there. Anytime you're dealing with the drug dealers, you've got like the Rescuer character who's actually way overplayed. But it's not the actor's fault, it's a good actor playing it, but he's been told to overplay it. You've got a mysterious figure who's his advisor who is a fun character. So those scenes are a bit overdone because you don't get the threat of the drug cartels ever. They're just like pawns for this story, ultimately. Because none of them are actually scary as they should be. You've got the political side of the different CIA people, which are fun because you've got good actors playing them. And the president's a good fun actor, who was in The Thing, Donald Moffat. So you've got a lot of fun actors in these parts, and you've got manipulations, and you've got Willem Dafoe as Clark, who's the guy on the ground who's running the operation, and he says at the beginning, this is going to be a disaster, you shouldn't do this. No, we're going to do it. Okay, well, I'll run it, but be careful. So he runs and he actually gets the troops in and actually has them doing things. He gets them targeting different places. And he does something like saying, look at this, look at that. So that kind of situation works well. But they've also got Ryan character, Harrison Ford character in here, investigating this, investigating that, finding solutions. But he never works. It's like they're terrified of having a character who's interesting and potentially nuanced. Instead, he has to be a boy. They also call him a Boy Scout character in the film, just because it's so obvious he's so unrealistic in the story. The character doesn't work. The character's always messing the story up. Now, it would work a lot better if he was a lower level agency guy, a younger character. That would work. But having him the head of CIA intelligence doesn't work. And Harrison Ford's part doesn't work. So it becomes this complicated story that's getting messed up by its own lead character. So you've got some good sequences. You've got an attack in Mexico where the head of the FBI is taken out during an investigation. That works really well, but they have to put Harrison Ford in it. And it's like, because he's the lead character, and it works as a story point, but it's like he's the only one that escapes from it, and it just becomes this thing of his character becomes a problem in the film. And as the film goes on, and as all the manipulations happen, and there's some bombing stuff that looks really nice, but at a certain point they have to pull out the troops, and they have to make a deal in the middle, and 2/3 of the way through the film, the lead villain, figures out the American troops in South America and his countries. He kind of works it out, and he uses that as a way to get the Americans. In the dumbest scene ever. Because he tells them that, okay, let me have the troops so I can, because, I mean, for the first 2/3 of the film, the drug dealers don't know who's doing it. They think it's internal. They don't realise it's external. It's the actual soldiers doing this. They think it's a drug war going on between the different cartels. When he realises it's not, it's Americans, he talks to them, when the head of CIA is saying, like, the NSA guy, he goes, okay, I'll actually if you help me take these guys out, if you help me here, I can take these guys out, and the ones that are left, I can get them killed. I can take over and I can cut the amount of drugs into your country. And if you do that, you need to let me kill these soldiers. Dumbest deal ever. Because there's no way. I mean, in South and Latin America, drug deals come up and down all the time. There's always going to be someone new coming in. There's always someone new who's going to be putting money into this and exporting drugs to America. It's a social problem. It's not. Taking out the cartels there's always going to be someone new doing that. So it doesn't make any sense. He can control it somehow. That's insane. And also, you're just leaving proof of wrongdoing of your actions in the hands of your enemy. As soon as you say that, you should get these guys out of here quick. No, he doesn't do that, and it's like, oh my god, this is so dumb. And then Harrison Ford has to go in and save them, and it's basically an act of war at that point to save these guys who are proof of his government's own problems, and he has to save them. And these guys are actually soldiers who went into this illegal action knowingly, so you're meant to really feel for them, but you really can't because you're doing something illegal. You're a criminal, basically, at this point. So all the nuances that could be in there are just gone, because you have a plot twist that doesn't make sense, and then suddenly our hero has to go from being a CIA guy to being a hero, to being kind of Rambo-ish and take out the guys out, and involves them going to the house of the lead drug dealer, the Escobar character, as if he wouldn't be instantly killed. And there's lots of shootouts and stuff, and it makes no sense. It's so stupid. So that's Clear and Present Danger. It's stupefying how they take something which could have been a good idea for a fun, cynical film and completely mess it up by having a lead character that doesn't work within a situation and having a plot twist that is absolutely ludicrous to justify your last half hour, 40 minutes of action. It's insanely dumb. The last third is as dumb as anything in the Patriot Games. Again, it's done by Philip Noyce, directed it. They had some decent writers in there. They had John Milius doing bits. I heard he did the early stuff. And a bunch of other writers who also are good writers. It's just a stupid idea at the end of it. The last third is like mind-numbingly dumb in a way that's like, wow, you really didn't give a crap about anything, did you, at this point? And it's annoying because the first third, two-thirds have lots of room for potential. There's lots of good stuff in there. As long as you don't have the Harrison Ford in the scene. Or if you have him been in the background, let some other character take over. But he did not work in this part. And I like Harrison Ford in a lot of parts, but he did not work for this character. It was just like his presence and the sincerity he was trying to show this character. It can drove me up the wall, basically. So we moved on to Sum of All Fears. This was originally made by another Harrison Ford one. He turned it down. He did not like the idea, apparently, of the nuclear weapon going off. So they had a whole new team come in and rewrote the script. Ben Affleck became Jack Ryan. Philip Alden Robinson came in as the director. He done Field of Dreams and he did Sneakers. And we had a much better film, ultimately, because of that. It has one massive flaw, which is the villains are neo-Nazis from Europe, which is completely unrealistic. I mean, there are kind of people of right-wing extremist persuasions in Europe. Yeah, same as there are some in America. But they're an embarrassment. They're not a power thing. People look at them as, oh God, them. Do not let them in their power. You know, in Europe we actually have an embarrassment over the Nazis. Even from Britain, where Britain actually helped defeat the Nazis, there's still an embarrassment of this was like a white supremacist thing. There's a real sensitivity towards this area in Britain and in Europe. You know, some little bits of parties emerge sometimes and they get knocked back down. There is a kind of genuine revulsion towards this. There's no way they'd be in power. There's no way they could actually control Europe in any way. In any way, they're trying to control the war between America and Russia. It doesn't make sense, ultimately. It's like, they went from Muslim terrorists in the book to this in the film. So they didn't want to attack Muslims. And I can see why not, why they wouldn't want to do that either. But they should have just done this with a shadow company. They don't quite know who they are. It would have worked a lot better than this. But despite that problem, the film works a lot better. The character stuff works better. Ben Affleck is much better as Ryan. He's younger. He's starting out in this film again, sort of like where Alex Baldwin was. And it's about him learning the ropes. Well, he's suddenly in this situation where he's a young guy in the room. He's not trusted. And he has information because he's been studying the various leaders who might become the next Soviet president, because the Soviet president dies. So the new leader comes into place. He's the one who wrote the stuff on him. So he's been brought in, and then the things start to escalate as these villains manipulate both America and Russia to start a war. And that's all of it's pretty creepy. Ultimately, it's how the problems on both sides of the Russians dealing with the president having to deal with the Russian military, an American president who's not as prepared as he should be, and he doesn't take the nuclear war as serious as he should, and he also loses his temper a lot. And it's the idea of the fallibilities on both sides can get manipulated by a dirty bomb going off in Baltimore. And the whole idea is a well-placed bomb can cause massive disruption because the bomb is aimed at the president actually moves at the last minute because Ryan figures out where the target's going, so he gets him out. So there's all these things going on, but the whole idea is this sort of cycle of paranoia, and people are not willing to back down and say, let's investigate this. No, they're getting more and more paranoid and more insane about the reactions. This came out just after 9/11. It was shot just before 9/11, and they had to push it back a little bit because they realised we have to be very careful with this because it's really about what's just happened in the world. Like a terrorist attack on American soil. I mean, I'm sure they were pretty happy they changed the villains from Muslims at that point, because it would have looked like an attack on every Muslim country at that point if this film had been released with those original villains. But the other villains were useless. But the actual sense of paranoia, I mean, the actual villains you only see them for like 10 minutes of film. The rest of the time it's just the plot and how they're working it out and how everyone's been manipulated slowly but surely and how people are profiting from it, like arms dealers and things. All that stuff works really well. You've got a lead who's actually trying to prove himself and doesn't know when to shut up, and has been put into situations where he's in over his head, and that works a lot better because Affleck's got a nervous energy to him in this film that really works because it's a character who is in over his head, and it's a nice change from Harrison Ford, who was always going for sincerity. This works a lot better. Alden Robinson is good with character actors. There's a lot of character actors around in the film. James Cromwell plays the president who's in over his head as well. A lot of good actors around him in his war room. Kevin Hines is the Russian president, and he's really good too. So all the interactions are really cool, and you like the scenes as they go on. Because the first half of the movie is set up, so there's lots of nice little character beats in there, and then when the second half comes, it's much more about the paranoia and people losing grip on reality. So it works really well. I mean, it's not Doctor Strangelove or anything, but it works well for what it is. It's a thriller with this outlandish situation. And what would happen if this happened? It works well. It's a good, solid film. It's not in the same league as Hunt for October. If they'd got the villains right, it might have actually almost been there. But it doesn't have the action chops that John McTiernan has. But it's still, to me, it's the second best in the series. You know, it's still the enjoyable one, even though there's some problems. The film did well, but not great. They didn't push ahead with another film with Affleck as a lead, because he had a couple of bombs right after this. And instead of just waiting a lot but then coming out with another one, they just shelved the whole thing. And this was before his career resurgence. So we waited a decade, and then we had the Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit, the Kenneth Branagh film with Chris Pine as Ryan now. This one, when I first saw it, I thought it was boring as hell. I didn't like it at all. I saw it again recently for this video, and I liked it a lot more. It's It's enjoyable. It's nothing new. I mean, there's nothing in here that's going to amaze you. But it's well done pulp, basically. I mean, it has a distinction that most of it takes place in Russia. The whole idea is we go back to the beginning of Game of Ryan. We're in the third origin story of this character in 5 films. I think that really got people's nerves with this film. I think it really hurt the film. So you see him in a crash, you see him meeting his future wife again. You see him working on Wall Street as an analyst for Wall Street while being in CIA. And he's basically a CIA spy in Wall Street to see if money's gone through various illegal locations to fund terrorism. That's his job, is to find that. It's an interesting idea. And it works pretty well. Pine's good as Ryan, gains that energy, that youthful energy. He's finding it difficult to be a spy and also be a normal person. He has to go to Russia to investigate something, thinking it's just a simple investigation. It would take a day or two and then he'll be out again. He's going to meet his girlfriend in Paris afterwards. She's played by Keira Knightley. She goes to Russia to follow up on him because he's acting a bit weird. And it turns out that his investigation's a lot tougher than it thinks. Some guy tries to kill him in his hotel room early on. He's up against Kenneth Branagh as the villain as well as the director. And it becomes this thing of, okay, what's this guy trying to actually do? So it becomes this stock manipulation of the market after a terrorist event is the plot. You know, very similar to Some of Our Fears with the terrorist plot. There's nothing new here. There's a moment where he has to break into the villain's lair and get the information. You know, his girlfriend is kidnapped. He has to get her back. He has to go to find out who the terrorist is and find the location of the terrorist act and then stop it. Again, as you can see from my voice, you've seen all this before. You've seen it in TV, you've seen it in films. There's nothing new here. But it's done with fun. It's fun. I mean, the villain, you turned out, Branagh's villain, is a character who's very much similar to the villain in Tenet. And he's not as one-dimensional as you initially think. He's a patriot. He wants Russia to do well, and Russia's failing the world. So that gives it a different angle. Ryan's character's good. His relationship with his wife's good. Or his future wife's pretty good. The action scenes at the end are well done. Everything's well done. There's nothing wrong with the film. It's just that it's come too late. It's not a unique story. TV's done this so often now that the character wasn't really ready for the big screen anymore. It was just it moved to TV really for those kind of plots. So it wasn't anything new. So the film didn't do well, and they didn't do another one. But it's an enjoyable film. It's just nothing new. There's nothing new at all there. It's just a film you watch for 100 odd minutes, and you've seen it, and it's fun. You know, the acting's decent, directing's decent, the script's decent. Nothing's new, but it's fun. The series then went on to Amazon. There's a Jack Ryan series with John Krasinski. I've seen the first season. I haven't seen the second season. It's enjoyable, but again, because the problem with this series, if you're not American, you really see it as potentially dangerous and potentially dodgy. The series tends to feel a bit like propaganda. Even though there are good actors in it, it feels a bit kind of dodgy at times because they tend to view other cultures from their prism in a way that's not accurate to those other cultures. It's a problem with films as well, because I've only got so much time. But in the films, they tend to be spycraft. I mean, in Shadow Recruit, Costner plays the guy recruiting Ryan, and it's all about spycraft, the cynicism of it all. So the films tend to trade in that a little bit more. The TV show did trade in that, but it felt kind of half-arsed, to be honest. It's my opinion. So it's a fun series of films that is pretty much the American side. So if you don't buy the CIA as what it tries to project itself as, you can have some fun being cynical with these films. Because they are dodgy. dodgy elements in the film, especially the Harrison Ford ones. They're really dodgy because they just go full 2 feet into propaganda. In a way, the other ones tend to be much more about someone trying to stop a disaster, a young person trying to stop a disaster, which is much more palpable for an audience rather than way he CIA type of thing. So there is that kind of issue with the films. But they are fun thrillers. If you actually watch them after watching the Clancy adaptations, they look pretty propagandist, though, to be honest. And the Clancy stuff's a lot better. Just generally. He's a better writer than Tom Clancy ever could be. And he just understands spy world a lot more. So, those are the better films. You know. And you want for fantasy, Bond's better as well. But there are some good ones in here. But Red October and Son of All Fears especially. But the Harrison Ford ones are hilariously bad at times. They're just astonishingly bad. I mean, as I love our bad films, they have some amazing sequences of like, oh my god, this is insane. You know, they're worth it for that, if nothing else. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm back with some more. But that's me for now. Bye.